never been to such a beautiful place.
Stellar Blade has been making waves on the internet for weeks now, and for some pretty weird reasons. On one side, we've seen people hailing the game as the messiah that will save gaming from the woke and ugly, like it's the second coming of Jesus. On the other, we have folks like IGN France, who, in their attempt to put the game down, have simply lost any semblance of decorum that you would expect from an organization at their level. I mean, seriously, it was so bad that IGN had to be given a lesson on realistic body types by Maxim Korea. Imagine that. It's been a roller coaster for sure, and we'll definitely see a lot more of it because, after all, social media is all about clout and clicks. But as someone whose favorite game is Nier Automata, I've seen a lot of these kind of opinions over the years, and as a result, I'm a little desensitized to this kind of content. So never mind the crap, I'm just gonna spread them cheeks wide apart and dive deep into the crack, the meat of the game. But first, there's one thing I'd like to address because I think it'll be brought up inevitably, and I think it's pretty easy to nip it in the bud. Needless to say, Stellar Blade does not shy away from fan service. Whether you're cutting through a big bad boss or just running around taking in the sights, there's plenty of jiggly TNA to enjoy. And like any game that does this, it runs into the risk of drawing attention away from the game's heavier moments. Let's face it, it's not exactly easy to take what's happening on the screen seriously if all you can see is some loose caboose staring right back at you. But hey, no judgment, maybe that's your thing. But here's the genius of Stellar Blade. There are so many different costumes in the game that you'll only see Eve's bare badonkadonk if you want to. For instance, take a look at this scene. It's not a funny scene at all, but it had me laughing because there's just too much ass on the screen. But in a way it's my fault because if I had a different suit on, the scene's impact would be different as well. The game has over 30 nanosuits that cover Eve's lively tush to various degrees, from completely exposed to slightly exposed to not exposed at all. To put it mathematically, the amount of cheeks you see on the screen is directly proportional to the amount of cheeks that you want to see on the screen. Hopefully, this should put a handle on complaints saying that Stellar Blade has too much booty to be taken seriously, because absolutely nothing is stopping anyone from putting Eve in fully covered clothes. And while we're talking about costumes, the nanosuits aren't the only thing you can change. There are plenty of options for glasses, earrings, and even hairstyles, so if you enjoy the dress-up aspect of games, you'll be more than satisfied to mix and match different suits and accessories. You can also customize the looks for Lily and Adam, though their options are limited to just suits. The drone can be customized too, so that's pretty cool. Just look at my cute little bunny drone. It's adorable, and it kicks ass. And talking about kicking ass, I found the demo a little disappointing because everyone had built up Stellar Blade as Sekiro meets Nier Automata, and I can understand why people would make that assumption because some of the enemy attacks are reminiscent of Sekiro. And a bodacious dump truck in a post-apocalyptic world obviously means Nier. But as far as the overall gameplay and combat are considered, I would have to disagree. The combat in both Nier and Sekiro has one common thing that's the complete opposite of Stellar Blade. The movement and pacing are much faster, and it's very easy to just get in and out of fights. Stellar Blade, on the other hand, wants you to commit to every enemy encounter. This is obvious by the fact that when you're sprinting around in the open, as soon as you draw aggro from an enemy, you slow down to a jog and automatically take your weapon out. And outside of the few super fast attacks, fights are relatively slower and deliberate where parries and counters feel heavy in terms of impact. In my opinion, the combat and general gameplay are closer to a mix of the 2018 God of War and Jedi Fallen Order with similar movement, pacing and impact with more elements added on top. There are plenty of puzzles and platforming sections too, and you can expect yourself to be ledge hopping along elevator shafts, double jumping on buildings, rope leaping across water bodies, and even wall running across canyons. But let's talk more about combat. It starts off a little clunky, but as you get used to the mechanics and start unlocking abilities, it gets much much better. Parries are very fun to pull off, and the added combos make them even sweeter. There are extensive skill trees, and as you unlock more skills, you can combine burst moves with regular counters and dodges, making for some amazing combos. The polished and smooth animations only add to the fun, and finishers, also known as retributions in the game, are incredibly satisfying to execute. There's also a tacky mode, which works pretty much like the Spartan Rage mode in God of War, and the game expects you to use every tool at your disposal because even at normal difficulty, boss fights can get tough as not all enemies take a lot of damage from regular attacks. And your drone doubles up as a ranged weapon, which is a pistol, shotgun, plasma beam and rockets all wrapped into one. And it comes in pretty handy too, especially in areas where the game basically becomes a third-person shooter. Though in Stellar Blade, instead of over the shoulder, I'd call it over the jiggly boulder. Actually, scratch that. I'd call it the titty titty bang bang. The game has a hard difficulty mode as well, which gets unlocked after you beat the game once. On the normal mode, the game isn't very difficult. I was able to get through every boss in 1 or 2 tries, except the final boss, which took 4 tries. In a recent interview, Yoko Taro, who's the creator of Nier Automata, said that Stellar Blade is actually better than Nier. And while he's known for downplaying his own work all the time, I will say that there are a couple of things that Stellar Blade does better than Nier. The first is visuals. Nier Automata is one of the most beautiful games I've ever played, but it's not exactly a great looking one. Stellar Blade, on the other hand, looks, well, stellar. The game boasts of high quality materials and textures, impressive lighting effects, and somber yet awe-inspiring environments. And while some of it can be attributed to generational improvements and Nier's low development budget, a lot of it is because of the game's own art direction. Stellar Blade has 5 levels between which you can travel anytime. 2 of these are open areas, one is the central hub, and the other 2 are relatively closed and guided. Each region has elements sprinkled throughout the map that give you a glimpse of past civilizations. Walking through Eidos 7 will show you different stores in the commercial sector and broken remains of structures in the construction area. The desert is full of remnants of a culture long forgotten, in the form of statues that stand tall in the sands of time and scattered hypertubes that once facilitated travel. A stroll down Matrix 11 is filled with defunct trains that once brought the subway to life and a verticality that has you climbing broken bridges. This world building is accompanied by lore bits scattered all around the maps, sometimes right in front of you, other times in hard to reach corners. And this is the second thing that I feel Stellar Blade does better than Nier. The deliberate world design and placement of lore tidbits just compel me to explore every nook and cranny. Memory sticks on bodies long gone and forgotten, ads and propaganda posters on walls, and old books and journals from past androids paint a picture of a world that once thrived and has been in turmoil for a long time. And at every turn, the game reminds you of how disconnected you are from the people who came before you. For instance, Eve doesn't know how a paper map works, and she thinks that libraries are a waste of resources because a book can only store up to 1 megabyte of data. She's surprised that someone would eat fish as a food because it's a whole dead body, and the best of all, the belief that humanity is synonymous with being cyberpunk, where flesh lives in harmony with technology in the same body, and the fact that humans can breathe in space. This is also reflected in the character designs. Cyberpunk aesthetics are very common in both Eve's clothes and those of other characters. Faith also plays a huge role in the world of Stellar Blade, where Mother Sphere is considered a deity that people worship, love, and fight for. And like any deity, Mother Sphere has her share of believers and skeptics, which you can see everywhere, including your own party. Lily is a staunch believer in Mother Sphere and Adam is a skeptic, sometimes to the point of being a straight-up downer. Their banter and little fights add a lot of character to the game, and so do Eve's interactions with other people. Some of the bits that I found funny were Eve's interactions with Roxanne, who for some reason is constantly hitting on her, and Eve's responses are just hilarious. During your mission to take down the Elder Netiba, you can also take on a number of side missions. Sadly, most of these side quests are simple fetch quests, but there are a few that stand out, like one where you help a guy who just wants to make sure that his girlfriend can walk again. Another one has you run errands for a tiny, self-aware robot who's pondering his existence. One quest even has you catch a giant whale. That's right, you can also go fishing in Stellar Blade, and I ended up spending quite a few hours fishing because the soundtrack is so enjoyable, it was easy to lose track of time while I waited for a bite listening to somber music that played in the background. And the soundtrack goes pretty hard in Stellar Blade. Different areas in each level get their own layered versions of a track, and a lot of it has similar vibes to Nier Automata. It doesn't feel like it hits at the same level as Nier, but it's hauntingly beautiful in its own way. But the writing is where Nier Automata shines, and Stellar Blade pales in comparison by every measure. It's not bad by any means, but it's also not mind-blowing, which is completely fine by the way. Not every game inspired by Nier has to make you question your entire existence. I'm not going to spoil anything about the story because there are a few moments that you should experience for yourself, but personally, I feel like Stellar Blade does a better job with lore and world building than its direct narrative. Which brings me to the biggest problem with Stellar Blade's story is that if you're paying attention to the notes and journals you find along the way, some of the twists become predictable. And while that's not a problem in itself, the parts building up to that reveal also fall flat, which makes that moment even less impactful. In an attempt to build the intrigue, it ends up giving away a few of its secrets too soon. There's also some clunkiness in the platforming sections, especially where you need to double jump between two ropes. Eve will just randomly change direction without any indication, which was definitely frustrating to deal with. One thing that I think Stellar Blade lacks is visual variety between the open levels. For instance, the wasteland and the desert are definitely not the same and you can tell a clear difference, but you can also see that they have a similar overall visual tone with different shades of brown and barren stretches of land. But on the plus side, the levels that look different really stand out, like the underground labyrinth of Matrix 11 or the VIP suite of the orbital elevator, which was a really nice change in scenery. This lack of variety is also an issue with side bosses, where every side boss you fight is just another encounter with the story boss you fought before. There's only one boss that you fight at the end of a side quest who's not a main boss as well. The story boss fights, however, have some impressive designs and the fights are top notch, and they only get better as you progress, but the side bosses are a sore disappointment. Now, I had a whole rant prepared to talk about how more than anything, it's the culture wars that are ruining gaming, especially with the focus on Eve's body. But the more I thought, the more I realized that Eve's physical design wasn't even on my mind the more I played the game. And as such, I don't think it's a discussion that's worth the effort. This isn't to say that character design isn't important. I mean, a lot of thought and passion goes into designing a character's looks and personality. And while I can appreciate that, it's really not something that makes or breaks a game for me. And that's the thing. Stellar Blade has a lot of great ideas, some that it delivers on very well and some that fall short in execution. The game's environment art, world building, combat mechanics, music and animations are its best parts. And there are a lot of things that we can talk about, like how it deals with the concept of the fusion of man and machine, the game's religious undertones, and what it means to be replaced by your own creation, especially in the age of AI. The game combines the deliberate pacing of a Souls-like with the flair of a character action game, and not a lot of games do that. There's also a lot of stuff for which you can criticize Stellar Blade, like how the game doesn't give you an option to turn off film grain. I mean, it's 2024 and that should be a basic feature. Or how the overall story feels lackluster in spite of all the interesting things happening in the background, or how a majority of side quests are bland and kind of pointless. But if you're going to be a fool who judges the game based solely on the kind of sexiness it has, go ahead. By the same token, if staring at boobs and butts is all it takes for you to buy a game, then please, go ahead and buy Stellar Blade right now, because I thoroughly enjoyed the 40 hours I spent in the game and would love to see how they can build and improve upon it in a sequel.